Late afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina. The last light of day poured down like diluted honey, gilding the porches of old wooden houses. Above, a few clouds drifted lazily across the sky, uncertain whether to rain or let the sun fade quietly away. Ruthie Mae Walker, 62, strolled along the brick path to her house. In her hand was a blue Publix grocery bag, a little heavy with the evening's simple meal. A loaf of bread, 2 cans of beans, a small bottle of sweet tea, and a still warm rotisserie chicken. The bag tugged at her elbow, but she didn't mind. All her life, Ruthie had carried heavier things: sorrow, duty, and the love of a single mother. The wooden steps creaked softly beneath her shoes. The air held the faint scent of magnolia mixed with damp earth. That house, the one she and Henry, her late husband, used to repaint every 2 years, still stood there, quiet, yet familiar. The screen door gave the same raspy squeak it always had. The kitchen wall still bore the carved height marks of little Jake. Every crack and flake of peeling paint was a memory that existed only in one's home. But today, something felt wrong. Ruthie pulled out her key ring, the same one with the silver angel charm Henry had given her one Christmas. She slid the key into the lock and turned it gently. It jammed. She tried again, harder, still nothing. She reversed direction, slowing down, then speeding up. Nothing changed. A chill crept into her chest. Maybe it was the werhapser, or maybe it was something she didn't dare name. She pressed her hip against the door when the latch stuck a little, but this time, the door didn't budge. Ruthie stepped back, staring at the lock as if it were an equation that no longer gave the same answer. Her hands stayed steady, but her heart didn't. Because seasoned mothers never panic first. They check again to ensure they're not mistaken. Then, from inside came footsteps, light, quick, unfamiliar. Not hers. The doorknob turned slightly. The door opened a narrow crack. A face appeared. Sierra Brooks, her son Jake's girlfriend. The young woman stood there, hair neatly tied, nails. She didn't speak, didn't move. She only stood there, staring at the girl before her, the one speaking on her son's behalf, saying words she never imagined she'd hear. "You don't live here anymore." "Jake said you'd already signed the transfer papers," Sierra murmured, her voice breaking. "It's just paperwork, nothing personal." Ruthie's lips parted, the words escaping thin as breath. "I signed what?" Sierra's mouth moved, but no words came. She stepped back, muttering, "I'll call Jake. He'll explain everything." Then the door closed, and this time, Ruthie heard the new lock click firmly into place. She stood there for 1 minute, then 5, then 10. The chicken in the bag cooled. Condensation from the sweet tea bottle dampened the fabric of her tote. Across the street, wind drifted through Henry's old trellis, setting the small metal wind chime, their 15th anniversary gift, trembling with a lonely ring. The sound was so out of place that it made the silence even deeper. At last, Ruthie drew a slow breath, a long one, heavy with memory. She adjusted the strap of her bag and turned away from the door. Her worn nurse's shoes tapped softly against the concrete. Steady, deliberate. The narrow street in front of the house was still the same, only this time she wasn't walking toward home. She was walking away from it. Years ago, before that little house, before the name Jake Walker ever entered her life, Ruthie Mae had believed she would never have a child. A devoted nurse at St. Anne's Hospital, she worked the night shift for 17 years, living alone in a small apartment a few blocks from downtown Charleston, where an old wall clock ticked and talked like an endless sigh. Her life crept on, time, on shift, on duty. Only one thing was out of rhythm. The dream of a family had never taken shape. 2 miscarriages. 1 failed round of fertility treatment. Ruthie didn't cry anymore. Over the years, that pain had hardened into an invisible scar, no longer bleeding, but never quite healed. Then, on a summer night in 1997, her shift began like any other, until a trainee nurse walked in carrying a little boy, maybe 2 years old, with a broken wrist, dirt on his skin, and hollow eyes. His shirt was smeared with what looked like ketchup and road dust. He barely spoke, didn't even cry, just clutched the sleeve of Ruthie's uniform when the younger nurse set him on the hospital cot. "The foster mom's gone," the trainee whispered. "She said she'd come back, but I don't think she will." Ruthie looked at the child. The fluorescent light washed over his small face, turning his ash-gray eyes even duller. She placed her hand gently on his head. The first feeling wasn't pity. It was silence. A complete, still silence, as though the whole world had paused just long enough to hand her an invisible thread. She didn't ask his name. She only said softly, "It's all right, baby. Everything's going to be fine." That night, the boy slept on the chair in her break room. Throughout her shift, Ruthie watched him, feeling something she hadn't believed she could feel anymore. The sense that she was needed. The next morning, when the social worker came to take him away, the boy cried, clung to her uniform like a vine to the last bit of light it could find. Ruthie's hands trembled as she held him, knowing they might lose something they would never get back if she let go. She hadn't planned to adopt a child, not at all. But sometimes sweetness of Sunday peach cobbler, and the gentle voice of a mother who constantly reminded him, "Write thank you notes after Christmas, because gratitude needs practice too." She knew her son wasn't like her, different skin, different roots, but there was no real distance in her heart. Whenever people stared at them on the street, Ruthie held his hand tighter, and Jake, only 4 at the time, would ask, "Mama, why did they look at us funny?" She smiled. "Because you're mine, and I'm yours. That's all." But fate never lets peace last forever. As Jake grew older, why he was different from his mother became a quiet divide, small at first, then widening like a crack in an old wall. But that was years away. For now, in that summer of 1997, in a small apartment under a still night sky, Ruthie Mae Walker became a mother, not by blood, but by choice. A choice made without ceremony or promise, only through one trembling embrace, and a silent vow whispered into the darkness. "I will never let you be lost again." Time passed like a summer river, slow but steady, carrying Jake's childhood gently along the quiet years of Charleston. Ruthie Mae kept working morning and night shifts at St. Anne's Hospital, always coming home to the scent of soap and the soft creak of the beige-painted front door. She marked her son's height on the kitchen wall in pencil lines, half an inch apart each year, silent proof of time, growth, and hope. Jake's childhood was made of warm cinnamon rolls and church hymns from the old radio, afternoons watering flowers together, and his mother teaching him to say, "Yes, ma'am," to grown-ups. A gentle boy, quiet, quick to smile. But at 13, he began to see the world differently. One day, while they were at the supermarket, Ruthie noticed how he kept glancing around. Then he asked quietly, "Mama, why is everyone looking at us?" She smiled. "Because they've never seen love look quite like this." But that answer no longer satisfied a boy beginning to search for his identity. Some kids teased him at school. "She's not your real mom." At first, Jake stayed silent, but those words returned again and again, carving tiny scratches inside him. Ruthie found him sitting by the window that night, the streetlight casting soft gold across his thoughtful face. "Are you okay, son?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I don't look anything like you." Ruthie touched his shoulder gently. "You don't have to. Loving is enough." He nodded faintly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the darkness outside. A darkness filled with something larger, farther away, something she could never quite reach. Through high school, Jake grew more withdrawn. Dinners grew quieter, conversations shorter. When Ruthie asked questions, he only said, "I'm fine." He said he had a group study when she suggested going to church, and when she baked peach cobbler, his old favorite, he took one bite and murmured, "Too sweet." That was how love began to crack. Not from absence, but because there was no place to set it down. In his senior year, Jake started staying out later, nights with friends and fewer calls home. Ruthie kept the untouched, bed, blanket, pillow, and the race car model, all just the same. Every time she dusted, she smoothed the sheets and whispered, "Whenever you miss home, this place is still here." But the calls came less often. The texts went unanswered. And in those quiet years, Ruthie learned to love in silence, like someone waiting by a window, knowing no one might ever return. Then Henry, her steady, gentle husband, passed away. She thought Jake would stay for a while, but he came only for a day, then left again. When he hugged her goodbye, he asked, "You okay, Mom?" She smiled. "Yes, baby. I'm always okay." But that night, alone at the dinner table, Ruthie looked at the empty seat where Henry once sat reading the Bible, and she understood. Sometimes the most profound loneliness doesn't come from losing a husband, but from losing a child who's still alive. 3 years after Henry's death, summer sunlight poured over Charleston like thin honey again. The oaks along the street cast long shadows across the ground, and the little house on Magnolia Street was so quiet you could hear the ceiling fan turning slowly. Ruthie Mae Walker, now in her early 60s, still lived to the steady rhythm of someone who'd been a nurse far too long. Up early, brew tea, check her blood pressure, read a few verses of scripture, then sit on the porch watching the bougainvillea bloom. Life was lonely, but orderly, until one afternoon. A silver pickup truck stopped at the gate, and the person who stepped out was Jake. He hadn't called. No letter, no phone, just showing up like a strange wind in the heavy afternoon. He looked different now. Hair slicked back, white dress shirt fitted close, a shiny watch on his wrist. A kind of brightness Ruthie had never seen on the boy who once went to school on a scholarship and wore worn-out shoes. Beside him was a young woman with wavy brown hair, a phone always in her hand. Sierra Brooks. "Hey, Ma," Jake said, stepping onto the porch and quickly hugging her. His voice carried a touch of affection, a touch of haste, and a lot of unfamiliarity. Ruthie kept her gentle smile and opened the door. "Come in, son. I've just baked a peach cobbler, right on time." Sierra smiled faintly, her eyes flicking around as if assessing the place. The small house was simple, an old wedding photo, a few potted plants, Henry's wooden clock. Everything speaking of a life not rich, but enough. In the first weeks, Ruthie believed her son had truly come home. He mowed the lawn, changed light bulbs, and regularly brought her blood pressure meds. The girlfriend helped arrange the cupboards, advising on all kinds of things. "You should update your paperwork to make it more legal." Ruthie was touched. She thought perhaps losing Henry had made Jake realize the value of this home, of the mother who'd sat up all night by his sickbed when he was a boy. But as time went on, Ruthie began to notice something was all just work. But one day she heard Sierra whisper, thinking Ruthie couldn't hear, "If we close this one, we can cover the down payment for the Atlanta condo next month." The words were like a tiny needle puncturing the calm skin of life. That night, Ruthie couldn't sleep. She sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the dark garden. Everything around her was the same, the old chair, frame, and nightlight still glowing. But the feeling wasn't. It wasn't the house that had changed. It was the people inside it. Jake began coming home more often, but no longer spent time with his mother. He made more phone calls, talking about investments, papers, legal stuff. She asked, "What are you planning to do with this house, Jake?" He only smiled. "Nothing, Ma. I just want you to feel safe. You know me." Ruthie nodded, but a vague premonition stirred. The same instinct that saved countless patients in her nursing days. Something is about to break when the heartbeat goes irregular. One late autumn afternoon, Ruthie stood in the garden with a watering can and heard Sierra's voice drifting from inside, woven between the sound of typing. "Babe, let me know when the papers are done. I don't want to wait until the new year. Prices might drop." Ruthie froze. She set the can down, looking at the bougainvillea already fading, and understood. What was dying wasn't just the leaves. That night she sat alone in the living room. Henry had once told her, "Ruthie, sometimes your kindness is exactly where people choose to plant the knife." She hadn't believed him while he was alive, but now, maybe he'd been right. Ruthie didn't say anything to anyone. She did the only thing the experienced know how to do: observe silently, carefully, calmly, like someone listening to a strange heartbeat in the emergency room. From that moment on, she knew the child who once called her mama had returned, not to stay, but to calculate. And this time, Ruthie didn't know how the fight would end. She only knew one thing: if she lost again, she wouldn't lose sight. It was a quiet Sunday noon, sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, gilding the wooden table where Ruthie always folded dish towels at the end of each week. The smell of peach cobbler baking filled the house, sweet, warm, carrying memories of days gone by, when Henry was still alive, when little Jake would run around the chairs laughing and shouting, "Mama, I want more vanilla ice cream." She didn't know that today, that sweet smell would become the bitterest memory of her life. The silver pickup pulled up right at midday. Ruthie heard the familiar sound of a car door closing, then Jake's footsteps on the brick path. "Ma?" he called, his voice oddly cheerful. "I brought some papers for you to sign real quick." Behind him, Sierra walked in, phone still in hand, speaking softly into her headset. "Yes, I sent the file already." "Uh-huh. We can sign tomorrow, too." Ruthie wiped her hands on her apron, turned around and smiled. "What papers are these, son?" Jake laid a thick folder on the table like a magician presenting a new trick. "Here, some tax forms, insurance stuff, and a few transfer of authority papers. Nothing serious, just to streamline your assets, Mom." Sierra looked up, cutting in with a professional, faintly cold tone. "This is necessary, Ms. Ruthie. It helps avoid inheritance complications later on, should anything happen." The words made the kitchen air go cold. Ruthie frowned. "I've never thought about that." Jake smiled lightly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know, Mom. That's why I'm thinking ahead for you. Just sign. It's all still yours. We're just putting it under a trust. You'll still live here. Everything stays the same." She looked at the papers. Tiny printed letters, rows and rows like tangled threads. She was used to drug charts and medical records, but these words were foreign, legal and slippery. She took off her glasses and wiped them with her shirt. Jake said quickly, "No need, Mom. I've marked the spots. Just sign where I flagged." She smiled wearily. "I don't really understand all this." "I do," he signed, only feeling her shoulders sink as if someone had just taken something invisible but precious. Jake grinned, clipping the pen back, teasing, "You're the easiest person in the world, Mom. I told you, you always trust people." Ruthie chuckled, the sound small as a breath, without knowing it was the last laugh she would have in this kitchen. When Jake and Sierra left, she pulled the peach cobbler from the oven and set it on the table. The golden smell mixed with the afternoon sun, making the house glow. She cut a piece, placed it on a plate, and took a bite. The sweetness was still there, but somewhere inside, something caught in her throat, like swallowing tears without letting anyone see. She didn't know those papers would erase her name from this house in a few weeks. But she was beginning to sense, dimly, like a nurse smelling the wrong medicine in a patient's room, something was being swapped. And if she was right, it wasn't just paperwork. It was family. That morning, sunlight spread evenly across the old tiled roof, spilling into the living room where Ruthie Mae was arranging flowers. She still kept her Wednesday routine. Henry used to say, "A clean house means a clean heart." So even though she lived alone, she still wiped every picture frame, vacuumed every corner of the floor, as if the house were waiting for someone to come home. The Dyson vacuum hummed softly, its steady sound blending with the faint country song on the radio. She was pausing to rest when she heard a car stop outside. Jake stepped in, sunglasses still on, earbuds dangling around his neck. Behind him was Sierra, chatting through her Bluetooth headset, smirking slightly without looking at anyone. They walked past Ruthie without a word, bringing only the smell of perfume and the rush of air from the open door. Jake spoke once he'd gone a few steps. "Oh, Mom, next time you use the Dyson, remember to empty the dustbin, okay? We've got people coming to see the house this weekend." Ruthie looked up. Light filtered through the thin curtain, casting a glow across her face. Calm, but with a trace of unease. "See the house?" she asked, her voice steady, not loud, not soft. Jake smiled, took off his sunglasses and set them on the table. "Yeah, just to get an estimate. You know, Mom, investors need to understand the market ahead of time." Sierra chimed in, her voice quick and polished, like she was reading an ad. "It's just an appraisal, Ms. Ruthie. Nothing to worry about." "What kind of appraisal needs Henry's room cleared out?" Ruthie asked, her eyes never leaving her husband's photo on the wall. Jake hesitated for a second, then forced a smile. "Don't overthink it, Mom. We're just preparing for the future." "The future of who, son?" Her words were slow, clear, deliberate. In that moment, the room fell silent. Only the ceiling fan turned above them. Jake looked down, shrugged slightly. "Of all of us, of course." She set the vase down, wiped her hands on her apron, and stood up straight. "Jake," she said, her voice low but firm, "what exactly are you planning to do with this house?" He smiled faintly. "Mailman. But I suppose I forgot to teach you how not to hurt the person who raised you." Jake pressed his lips together, avoiding her gaze. Sierra stepped forward, uneasy. "Ms. Ruthie, Jake didn't mean—" Ruthie raised a hand, cutting her off, her tone still gentle, like a breeze. "It's all right. Don't explain. Everyone has to learn the meaning of home in their own way." She turned away, not looking back. Inside her, everything seemed to cave in, yet her face remained calm, almost serene. That evening, Ruthie packed a few things. Her old Bible, the wedding photo, a picture of Jake as a child, and a brown leather notebook where she'd written down everything worth remembering. Then she took Henry's old canvas travel bag from the closet, tucked in a few clothes, her passport, her medicine, and the wedding ring she'd removed 3 years earlier. As the sun set, she stepped out of the house in the soft orange glow of dusk. No one saw her off. No one asked. The door closed behind her, the latch clicking, the final sound marking the line between mother and guest. Ruthie drove her old sedan down a small road outside town that night. The neon sign of the Budget Motel blinked red and green, its light flickering across her face. Room 107 is plain, musty, with worn curtains and a creaking bed. But at least it was the only place where the lock still belonged to her. She sat on the bed, opened her notebook, and with trembling hands wrote a single short line. The day my son called me a guest. The day I knew I had to find myself again. Outside, the rumble of trucks on the highway blended with the hum of crickets. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, weary but unbroken. A faint, quiet smile touched her lips, because somewhere within the pain, Ruthie felt something else stirring. An awakening. She said that night, the sky over Charleston hung heavy with clouds. The sea breeze drifted inland, carrying the faint salt of the water and the distant scent of gasoline from the highway. In the parking lot behind an old gas station, Ruthie Mae's silver-gray sedan sat motionless, a dark shape under the dim yellow glow of the street lamp. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. She had turned off the engine, but her hands still gripped the steering wheel. 10 and 2. The perfect driving posture. Her wrists trembled slightly. Not from the cold, but from the realization that her heart had come full circle, only to end here. Cast out of the very home she built. On the back seat lay her old fabric bag, and on top of it, a takeout container she'd brought along. A roasted Publix chicken, now cold, the transparent lid fogged with condensation. The familiar scent, once the smell of family dinners, now only tightened her throat. She looked at it for a long time, then took a slow breath. The streetlight's glow brushed across her face. Deep lines, tired eyes, but still that glimmer of light, the kind that belongs to someone who refuses to break. She didn't cry. She wouldn't allow herself to. Because tears, to Ruthie, were for those who still hoped, and tonight, hope had closed its door along with that house. Through the windshield, the world looked distant. Pale lights, telephone poles, and an old billboard half-faded reading, "Jesus saves." The worn-out words made her chest tighten. Yes, the Lord had saved her once, by placing a child into her arms nearly 30 years ago. But perhaps this time, he wanted her to save herself. She switched on the car light and reached into her bag for the brown leather notebook that had followed her since her nursing days. Inside, among notes about medicine, phone numbers, and prayers, there was one page thicker than the rest, folded neatly, hidden in the middle. Ruthie opened it. The ink had faded slightly with time. It read, St. Anne's versus Cooper Medical Group. Settlement, $9,500,000, 3 years ago. After Henry died from a blood clot that had been misdiagnosed, the hospital called. They said it was a natural complication. But Ruthie, who had worked because justice, even late, had finally arrived. And Ruthie told no one, not the neighbors, not the relatives, and indeed not Jake. She opened a private account under her maiden name, Ruthie Mae Carter. The money was divided across several banks, a little here, a little there. She didn't spend lavishly, didn't buy a new car, didn't change a thing. She only wrote one quiet line in her notebook the day the funds cleared. Don't let money make you loud. Let it buy you peace and time. Sitting in her silent car, Ruthie reread those words and smiled faintly. The first genuine smile since leaving her house. She whispered, "Jake thinks he took everything from me, but he doesn't know. The one thing I never signed away was my faith in myself." She closed the notebook gently and turned off the light. Outside, the wind rattled the car windows, carrying the whisper of Charleston's night. In the dark, Ruthie leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. No longer the woman who lost her home, but the woman is preparing to take back her life. The next morning, Ruthie stopped by a small bank on Meeting Street. She checked her balance. The numbers glowed on the screen, exact, untouched, intact. She nodded softly, smiling to herself for the first time with genuine calm. Not because of the money, but because of the quiet power that comes from knowing and waiting. As she stepped out of the bank, the sunlight touched her shoulders, turning the silver strands of her hair to gold. In her bag, the notebook still carried the same old line, but beneath it she added a new one that morning. My son thought he cast me out, but set me free. The next morning, Charleston's sky was startlingly blue. The ocean breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of salt and roasted coffee from the harbor diner off Highway 17. Its old signboard, white paint flaking, leaned slightly in the wind, but inside, the sound of clinking dishes, low conversation, and the smell of buttered pancakes still warmed the air. That was where Ruthie Mae chose to meet Clarence Monroe, the one person she still trusted in this world. Monroe was in his 60s now, silver hair, salt and pepper beard, weary eyes that still held their fire. Once, he had been one of Charleston's best trial lawyers, the same man who helped Ruthie win justice in the hospital case 3 years earlier. When he stepped inside, the doorbell chimed, and his gravelly voice cut through the hum of the diner. "Well, I'll be damned, Ruthie Mae Walker. You look like you just walked out of a storm." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." He sat across from her, his wrinkled suit smelling faintly of coffee and paperwork. A waitress poured him a cup of black coffee. He stirred it once, watching her through the rising steam. "All right," he said. "Tell me everything, from the top. Don't leave out a single detail." Ruthie told him, every moment, every word, each paper she'd signed, every glance from Sierra, every sentence from Jake. Her voice was calm, steady, though it faltered in a few places, the kind that used to be home, used to be love. Monroe didn't interrupt. He just nodded, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. When she finished, he exhaled slowly, sliding his glasses down his nose. His voice was low but firm. "He played you, Ruthie, but he forgot who taught him to read contracts and what the word honesty means." Ruthie lowered her eyes, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I don't want to destroy him, Clarence. I'm too tired for wars. I just want my house back, my dignity. I want to look in the mirror and not see a fool." He gave a small, knowing smile, the kind of smile worn by men who've seen too much of life. "Then we won't Outline. 1. In petition for fraudulent transfer, to request an investigation into the property transfer. 2. Injunction, to freeze Jake from selling or transferring the house. 3. DePiro, where Sierra was where Sierra will have to speak the truth under oath. He explained each step carefully, then looked up, voice hoarse but warm. I've got a friend still practicing. I'll connect you two. But Ruthie, yes, Clarence? Are you ready to reopen that wound? Because this isn't just about the house. It will drag every memory, every bit of love back into the light. Ruthie was silent for a moment. Outside, sunlight glinted off the diner's window, reflecting her face. Tired, but unbroken. Then she said quietly, Clarence, I've stood through more emergency rooms than I can count. I know what pain is. But I also know, if you don't cut the wound open, it festers. I'd rather hurt once than let it rot inside me. Monroe chuckled softly, lifting his cup. That's the Ruthie Mae I remember, the woman who made a whole hospital bow its head. They went over the rest in detail. When their talk was nearly done, Ruthie looked up, her voice low but steady. Clarence, there's one thing I haven't told you. He raised a brow. What's that? She drew in a slow breath. I have money. More than you think. How much? She placed a hand on her notebook, a small smile crossing her lips. $9.5 million from that lawsuit. I haven't touched a single cent. Monroe nearly spilt his coffee. Lord, Ruthie. And you let that boy play you while sitting on a fortune? She replied softly, almost like a whisper carried by the sea breeze. I didn't want money to change the way I loved my son. Now, it's changed the way my son loves me. Monroe said nothing. He simply reached across the table, placed his hand over hers and squeezed it firmly. That's all right. We'll get it all back. Not through anger, but intelligence. And this time, Ruthie, you won't fight alone. When Ruthie stepped out of the diner, sunlight fell across the line of cars on the road. The breeze lifted her silhouette. That afternoon, Charleston was drenched in sunlight. The kind of golden southern light, warm but tinged with a quiet melancholy, as if it shone on things that could no longer be undone. Ruthie Mae drove slowly down the old familiar road. Live oaks lined both sides, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Her house stood at the end of the street, newly painted, the porch repaired, the lawn trimmed to perfection. Beautiful, brighter than before. But cold, so polished it looked like every trace of warmth from the past 20 years had been scrubbed away. She turned off the engine and sat briefly, eyes fixed on the white fence Henry had once painted by hand. It used to be my home, she thought. Now it's just another property on someone's balance sheet. Ruthie opened the door and stepped out. Her shoes clicked against the brick walkway, the dry, deliberate sound, like the echo of a decision that could never be undone. The door opened. Jake stepped out wearing athletic shorts and a real estate hoodie, a protein shake in his hand, condensation rising in small wisps that made his breath look like smoke. Their eyes met. The first second, surprise. The second, tension. By the third, Jake managed a crooked smile. Ma, Ruthie, what are you doing here? The way he said it, careful, almost staged, as if afraid a hidden camera might be watching. Ruthie stood on the porch steps, keeping her distance. Her voice was soft, steady. Just a few minutes. I didn't come to cause trouble. I only need to say one thing. Jake glanced back into the house, perhaps worried Sierra might overhear, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The air between them thickened. Somewhere far off, cicadas hummed, filling the silence with the sound of heat and memory. Ruthie looked at her son, not with anger, but with the calm gaze of someone who has seen all the world's pain and still chooses gentleness. I raised you when no one else wanted to. Not out of pity, but because I believed that if someone needed love, I should be the one to start it. I gave you everything, sleep, meals, my youth. I taught you to write thank you notes, finished. Ruthie drew a long breath. I didn't come to scold you. I came to tell you something. I am not poor, Jake. I never was. You could sell this house 10 times and I could repurchase it 11. Jake's head jerked up, eyes wide. What? I have money, Jake. My own money. I never told anyone about $9.5 million from a lawsuit. You didn't take anything from me, except my trust. And that, you'll have to earn back on your own. Silence fell like a heavy quilt between them. On Jake's face, surprise melted into guilt, then fear. Ma, Ruthie, you're not suing me, are you? Ruthie smiled, a small, sad smile, more weary than angry. No, I'm not suing to win. I'm doing it so the truth can be called by its proper name. And to remind you, there are things money can never buy back. She turned toward the steps, her voice drifting like a breeze across the porch. I'll see you in court if I must. But today, I came only to look into your eyes, to ensure I can still recognize the person who used to be my son. Jake said nothing. He just stood there, motionless, while the sunlight poured over them. In that light, Ruthie's shadow stretched across the yard, small, but unbroken. Each step she took was firm, deliberate, not just a departure from the house, but from every chain that had once bound her to betrayal. The door closed behind her. No shouting, no tears. Only the quiet dignity of a woman walking away, carrying the one thing no one could ever take from her. Her dignity. 3 months after that confrontation, the house on Magnolia Street no longer echoed with laughter. Sierra and Jake were both gone. A small sign now hung from the upstairs window. For sale. When the realtor came to unlock the door, she remarked that the place felt heavy, as though it had witnessed something sorrowful. But across town, on the second floor of the Charleston County Courthouse, justice was quietly at work. No shouting, no tears. Only pages were turning, signatures were signed, and one silver-haired woman was sitting upright, her hand resting on a worn brown notebook. Attorney Clarence Monroe sat beside Ruthie, eyes following every word of testimony. Before them, the judge read aloud from the bench. The evidence shows that the defendant, Mr. Jake Walker, exploited the plaintiff's trust to execute a fraudulent property transfer. This agreement was entered into under misrepresentation and lack of transparency, and is void under Section 18 of the Property Act. The words rang out, clear, cold, official. But to Ruthie they sounded like truth retaking its first breath. She nodded once, no smile, just tightened her grip on Monroe's hand. He leaned over and whispered, "It's done, Ruthie. You won." She shook her head gently. "No, Clarence. I only just came back to balance." A week later, the house was legally hers again. The court sent the confirmation papers. Jake did not appear at the final hearing, only sent a short email of apology through his lawyer. Ruthie read it but never replied, not out of anger. But she knew some wrongs can only be washed clean by time, not words. When she received the keys back, Ruthie stood on the porch and looked inside. The door creaked open. Sunlight poured in, sweeping out the stale air of grief. She strolled from room to room. The chair is where Henry once read his Bible. The wall is marked with Jake's childhood height, and the scent of fresh paint masks the memory of baked peaches. Standing in the living room, she whispered to herself, "I didn't need this house to live. I needed it to prove that kindness is not something meant to be taken advantage of." A month later, Miss Ruthie, after all you've been through, how do you still stay gentle? Ruthie smiled, setting her spoon down. Because if you let them take your kindness too, then you've truly lost. A year later, Ruthie sat on the porch of Len's place, a thin blanket on her lap, a cup of jasmine tea in her hands. The sky was painted gold and tangerine. Evening settled like peace itself. Inside, Alma knitted. Darlene hummed along to an old gospel tune on the radio. The mail carrier arrived, handing her an envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded page in handwriting she knew by heart. Mom, I was wrong. I thought I was doing what was best. Now I see. It wasn't you who lost a home. It was me who lost a mire. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking that you stay well. Jake. Ruthie read it all, folded the paper carefully, and tucked it into her Bible. She didn't burn it. She didn't tear it. She kept it. Because forgiveness isn't erasing the wound. It's refusing to let the wound steer your life. A soft breeze drifted across the porch, carrying the scent of jasmine. Ruthie looked up at the violet sky and smiled. In that fading light, she finally saw it clearly. A home isn't just the place where you live. It's the place where you rise again, even after you've been pushed down. She closed her eyes and exhaled, not from fatigue but peace. Justice, she whispered, doesn't need an audience. It only needs a soul that can sleep in peace. Somewhere out there are mothers like Ruthie Mae, women who have lost everything, yet still choose to hold on to one thing, their dignity. They do not fight back with anger, but with a steady silence that forces the guilty to face themselves. This story isn't about a house. It's about something money can never buy. Honest love, trust, and self-respect. Because sometimes justice doesn't need applause. It only needs one woman brave enough to stand tall and say, I'm still here, and I'm still strong enough not to fall. If Ruthie's story reminded you of a mother, a grandmother, or someone who once suffered quietly but never lost their grace, share this video. Let them know that gentleness is not weakness, and silence does not mean defeat. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more true journeys, stories where the light of human dignity still shines, even in the darkest corners. Deep life tales, stories that don't need noise to reach the heart.